Welcome to Sleepy Life Eras. Tonight, we are spending a peaceful night inside an Edo, Japan home. Nothing here needs your attention. Everything moves slowly. You are safe to rest. You are safe to listen. The evening has already begun. It is late evening. Night has fully arrived. The interior space is quiet and complete. This is an Edo, Japan home, finished with the day. Tatami mats cover the floor in clean, regular sections. Their woven surfaces are flat and undisturbed. The pattern repeats evenly across the room. Wooden beams run above, darkened by age and smoke. Their surfaces are matte and unchanged. No detail draws focus over another. Low wooden furniture rests close to the floor. Each piece remains where it belongs. Nothing has been moved. Shoji screens form the walls. Paper panels are stretched thin within wooden frames. Their surfaces are smooth and opaque. Beyond them, there is only darkness. No exterior light enters the room. A single paper lantern provides illumination. Its light is warm and contained. The glow remains close to its source. Shadow fills the remaining space. Corners stay dark. Edges soften where light fades. The room holds a steady balance between light and shadow. Simple objects remain in place. A ceramic tea kettle rests unused. A folded cloth lies nearby. Lacquered containers sit closed and still. The air inside the room is quiet. No sound stands out. No activity remains. The space is intact. The night has already settled here. Nothing in the room is waiting. The room remains as it is. The interior stays quiet. Night holds its place. Tatami mats remain beneath the room. Their surfaces are even. The pattern continues without emphasis. Wooden beams remain above. Their presence does not change. No detail stands apart. Low furniture remains close to the floor. Its position is unchanged. Nothing has been adjusted. Shoji screens continue to form the walls. Paper panels remain smooth. Frames remain straight. Beyond them, darkness remains. No exterior light enters. A single lantern continues to illuminate the space. The light remains contained. Shadow remains where light does not reach. Corners remain dark. Edges remain soft. The balance between light and shadow remains steady. Objects remain where they are. A kettle remains unused. A folded cloth remains nearby. Containers remain closed. Nothing draws attention. The air remains quiet. Sound does not stand out. Activity does not return. The room remains complete. The night remains present. Time does not press forward. The space continues without change. Tatami remains underfoot. The pattern repeats without variation. Beams remain overhead. Their surfaces remain dull. Nothing moves within the room. Furniture remains close to the ground. Its outline remains familiar. Shoji screens remain still. Paper remains intact. Darkness remains beyond. The lantern remains the only light. Its glow remains nearby. Shadow continues to fill the rest of the space. Corners remain unlit. Edges remain indistinct. The room holds its balance. Objects remain simple. Their presence remains quiet. Nothing waits to happen. The air remains still. Silence remains even. The room does not change. Time remains undefined. The interior remains settled. Tatami remains flat. The repeating sections remain regular. Wood remains overhead. The beams remain where they are. Furniture remains low. Its placement remains ordinary. Screens remain closed. Paper remains pale in lantern light. Darkness remains beyond the walls. The lantern remains steady. Light remains close to its source. Shadow remains elsewhere. Corners remain unchanged. Edges remain soft. The room remains whole. Objects remain few. Details remain minimal. Nothing interrupts the space. The air remains quiet. The silence remains even. No sound arrives. The night remains settled. Time remains without markers. The room continues as it is. Tatami remains present. Patterns remain consistent. Beams remain above. Surfaces remain unchanged. Furniture remains near the floor. Its form remains simple. Screens remain still. Paper remains smooth. Darkness remains outside. The lantern remains lit. Its light remains contained. Shadow remains steady. Corners remain dark. Edges remain indistinct. The space remains balanced. Objects remain quiet. Nothing changes position. Nothing draws notice. The air remains calm. Silence remains constant. The room remains settled. The night remains present. Time remains unmeasured. The interior remains intact. Nothing in the room is waiting. Tatami mats remain across the floor. Their surfaces stay flat and even. The woven straw holds a consistent texture. The pattern does not change. Rectangular sections align beside one another. Each section meets the next without interruption. The seams remain straight. Nothing crosses them. The color of the tatami stays muted. No area appears lighter than another. The surface absorbs the lantern light evenly. No reflection forms. The mats rest close to the ground. Their height does not vary. The floor remains level throughout the room. The woven fibers remain tightly bound. No strand separates from the surface. The texture remains uniform from edge to edge. Tatami sections continue across the space. Their repetition fills the room quietly. No single section stands apart. The pattern remains familiar. It does not invite inspection. It simply remains. Light touches the tatami without emphasis. Shadow settles between the woven lines. Neither overtakes the other. The surface does not show signs of use. No marks interrupt the weave. The mats remain undisturbed. Tatami fibers hold their place. Their alignment remains consistent. Nothing presses into them. The floor does not shift. It does not respond. It remains as it is. Sections repeat in quiet sequence. The same shape returns again and again. The repetition has no end point. The tatami does not signal time. It does not mark change. It holds its form without variation. The woven surface remains consistent. Its texture does not demand attention. It stays present without emphasis. Tatami mats extend beneath the room. They support the space quietly. Nothing rests unevenly upon them. The edges of each mat remain aligned. The corners meet cleanly. No corner lifts. The floor remains complete. It does not require adjustment. It remains finished. Tatami surfaces remain unchanged. The weave does not loosen. The pattern does not fade. Light continues to fall evenly. Shadow continues to rest softly. The balance remains steady. The mats do not indicate movement. They do not respond to the night. They remain constant. Tatami sections repeat quietly. Their presence fills the lower space. Nothing interrupts their arrangement. The surface remains simple. The texture remains familiar. The floor remains settled. Tatami mats continue across the room. They hold the space without effort. They remain exactly as they are. The tatami pattern remains consistent across the floor. Rectangular sections repeat without variation. Each section aligns with the next. The spacing remains even. Lines run parallel across the room. They maintain their direction. No line diverges. The pattern does not draw attention to itself. It exists without emphasis. It remains familiar. The grid holds its form. Angles remain square. Edges meet cleanly. Each section mirrors the next. No section stands apart. The repetition remains uniform. The pattern fills the lower space of the room. It does so quietly. Nothing interrupts it. The arrangement remains unchanged. The layout remains settled. It does not shift. Tatami sections continue in steady order. Their alignment remains precise. The sequence holds. No variation appears within the pattern. No segment differs in size. The grid remains balanced. The repetition carries across the room. It maintains the same interval throughout. Nothing breaks the rhythm. The pattern does not indicate movement. It does not suggest change. It remains static. Lines continue side by side. Spacing remains consistent. Proportions remain steady. The pattern does not require inspection. It does not ask to be followed. It simply remains present. Tatami sections form a repeating field. The field remains even. Its shape does not alter. The grid extends beneath the room. It supports the interior quietly. It remains unnoticed. Each line holds its place. Each angle remains fixed. Nothing shifts alignment. The repetition remains continuous. It has no starting point. It has no ending point. The pattern exists as a whole. Individual sections do not separate from it. The grid remains intact. Tatami patterns remain regular. Their order remains calm. Nothing stands out. The layout continues across the floor. It remains predictable. It remains stable. The pattern does not change tone. It does not gain detail. It does not lose clarity. Lines remain visible but unobtrusive. They do not demand focus. They remain background. The grid maintains its spacing. Measurements remain even. No deviation appears. Tatami sections continue in their arrangement. Their repetition fills the room evenly. Nothing interrupts the sequence. The pattern remains simple. Its simplicity remains unchanged. It does not develop further. The grid remains settled beneath the interior. It holds the space quietly. It remains finished. Each repeated section maintains its place. Each boundary remains clear. The structure remains firm. The repetition does not advance. It does not retreat. It remains constant. Tatami patterns continue without distinction. Their sameness remains complete. No section carries more weight than another. The grid remains an even field. It remains unchanged across the floor. It remains present without emphasis. Lines continue in quiet order. Spacing continues without variation. The repetition remains uninterrupted. The pattern holds its form. It holds it without effort. It holds it without change. Tatami sections remain arranged as they are. Their repetition continues quietly. Nothing draws notice within the pattern. The grid remains balanced. The balance remains even. The balance remains steady. The tatami pattern remains across the room. It remains consistent. It remains familiar. Nothing alters its order. Nothing interrupts its spacing. Nothing changes its shape. The repetition remains complete. The grid remains whole. The pattern remains exactly as it is. Wooden beams remain overhead. They run across the ceiling in steady lines. Their position does not change. The wood appears darkened by age. Its surface remains matte. No section appears newer than another. Beams hold their place above the room. They support the ceiling quietly. Nothing presses against them. The grain of the wood remains subtle. It does not stand out. It remains even along each beam. The beams remain parallel. They maintain their spacing. No beam shifts away from the others. Shadows rest along their edges. The shadows remain soft. They do not deepen or fade. The beams do not reflect the lantern light. They absorb it quietly. The light does not linger on any one surface. Wooden beams remain unchanged. They do not signal time. They remain present without emphasis. Their length stretches across the ceiling. The length remains consistent. There is no variation along it. The beams form a steady structure overhead. The structure remains intact. Nothing disturbs it. Each beam keeps its alignment. The alignment remains straight. No angle changes. The wood remains dry and still. No sound comes from it. No response follows the night. Beams remain part of the ceiling. They do not separate from it. They remain fixed in place. The surfaces remain smooth from use over time. No rough edge draws attention. The texture stays consistent. The beams remain above the interior. They frame the space quietly. They do not enclose it further. Light reaches the beams evenly. It does not brighten them. It does not dim them. Shadow rests where the beams meet the ceiling. The shadow remains still. It does not shift position. The beams do not suggest movement. They do not suggest change. They remain constant overhead. Wooden beams extend across the room. Their repetition remains familiar. No beam appears distinct. The structure above remains complete. It does not require attention. It remains finished. The beams hold the ceiling in place. They do so without effort. Nothing strains against them. Their surfaces remain unchanged by the night. No mark appears or disappears. The wood remains as it is. Beams remain visible without drawing focus. They stay in the background of the room. They do not move forward. The ceiling remains supported. The support remains steady. No adjustment occurs. The beams remain quiet overhead. They hold their position without sound. They remain still. Wood remains set into its joints. The joints remain secure. Nothing loosens. The beams remain a steady presence. They remain unchanged across time. They remain familiar. No beam carries more weight than another. The load remains balanced. The balance remains even. The beams continue to rest above the room. They remain part of the space. They remain unnoticed. The wood does not respond to silence. It does not respond to darkness. It remains inert. Beams remain aligned across the ceiling. Their repetition remains complete. Nothing interrupts their order. The ceiling remains whole. The structure remains intact. The beams remain exactly as they are. Shadow lines rest along the wooden beams. They follow the length of the wood without variation. Their position remains fixed. Each shadow line stays close to the beam edge. No line separates from its place. The spacing remains even. Shadow does not deepen along the beams. It does not thin. It remains steady. The lines extend across the ceiling. Their direction does not change. They remain parallel. Shadow rests where light ends. The boundary remains soft. No edge sharpens. The lantern light does not reach past the beams. Shadow occupies the remaining space. The division remains constant. Each shadow line mirrors the next. No line appears heavier. No line fades sooner than another. Shadow remains attached to the structure above. It does not fall away. It does not move. The lines remain visible without emphasis. They do not demand attention. They remain background. Shadow follows the grain of the wood. The grain does not interrupt it. The line continues uninterrupted. Where beams meet the ceiling, shadow remains. It fills the narrow space evenly. No gap appears. The shadow lines remain quiet. They produce no sound. They remain inert. Light holds its boundary at the beam edges. Shadow holds the rest. The balance remains unchanged. No line drifts across the ceiling. No line shortens or lengthens. The form remains stable. Shadow remains consistent from one beam to the next. The repetition remains even. Nothing interrupts it. The lines do not indicate time. They do not mark hours. They remain outside measurement. Shadow lines continue along the wood. They do so without variation. They remain present. The ceiling remains marked by these lines. The marks do not change. They remain familiar. Shadow remains where light is absent. Light remains where shadow ends. Neither advances. The lines remain straight. They do not bend. They do not break. Shadow remains even along the beam edges. It does not pool. It does not scatter. The repetition of lines continues across the ceiling. Each line holds its place. The pattern remains complete. Shadow does not suggest movement. It does not suggest change. It remains static. The lines remain part of the ceiling structure. They remain attached to it. They remain fixed. The contrast between light and shadow remains soft. No sharp boundary forms. The transition remains gentle. Shadow lines remain subdued. They do not stand forward. They remain behind the space. The ceiling remains quiet beneath them. Nothing responds to their presence. Nothing changes. Shadow remains consistent across the beams. Its consistency remains uninterrupted. No deviation appears. The lines remain evenly spaced. Their spacing remains settled. Their order remains intact. Shadow remains a passive presence overhead. It does not press downward. It does not lift away. The beam edges continue to define the lines. The definition remains soft. It does not sharpen with time. Shadow lines remain unchanged by the night. They do not respond to silence. They remain unaffected. The repetition remains complete. The ceiling remains marked evenly. The shadow lines remain exactly as they are. Shoji screens form the walls of the room. Paper panels remain set within wooden frames. Their surfaces stay flat and even. Each panel holds its place. No panel shifts within its frame. The arrangement remains unchanged. The paper appears pale in lantern light. Its tone remains consistent. No area grows brighter than another. Wooden frames outline each panel. Their lines remain straight. No joint loosens. The screens remain closed. They do not slide open. They remain still. Paper fibers remain smooth. No crease forms. No tear appears. The surface reflects light softly. It does not shine. It does not dull further. Shoji panels repeat along the wall. Each panel mirrors the next. The repetition remains even. The frames remain evenly spaced. Their spacing does not vary. Nothing interrupts the sequence. The screens remain a boundary. They separate interior from exterior. They remain intact. No exterior light enters through the paper. Darkness remains beyond. The division remains complete. The paper holds the lantern glow evenly. Light does not pass through sharply. It remains diffused. The panels do not sway. They do not respond to the air. They remain fixed. Shoji frames remain quiet. They produce no sound. They remain inert. The panels remain familiar. They do not demand attention. They remain background. Paper surfaces remain uniform. No mark distinguishes one panel from another. The sameness remains complete. The screens do not indicate time. They do not change with the night. They remain constant. The wooden lattice holds the paper securely. The hold remains firm. Nothing loosens. Shoji panels remain aligned. Their alignment remains straight. No angle shifts. The surface of the paper remains calm. It shows no movement. It remains still. The screens remain part of the room. They do not move forward. They do not recede. Light reaches the panels gently. It does not brighten suddenly. It remains steady. Shadow rests along the frame edges. The shadow remains soft. It does not sharpen. Shoji panels continue along the wall. Their repetition remains uninterrupted. Nothing breaks the pattern. The paper remains unmarked. The frames remain smooth from use over time. No detail draws focus. The screens remain settled for the night. They do not prepare for anything further. They remain finished. Shoji panels remain a quiet presence. They hold the boundary without effort. They remain unnoticed. The wall remains complete because of them. The space remains enclosed. Nothing changes. The panels remain unchanged by silence. They do not respond to darkness. They remain unaffected. Shoji screens remain in place. Their repetition remains familiar. Their presence remains quiet. The paper remains pale. The frames remain straight. The screens remain exactly as they are. Darkness remains beyond the shoji screens. It holds its place outside the room. No light enters from it. The darkness stays complete. It does not thin. It does not brighten. Beyond the paper panels, the exterior remains unseen. No outline appears. No shape separates from the dark. The boundary between interior and exterior remains firm. Paper holds the division. Darkness stays beyond it. The outside does not announce itself. It remains absent from the room. Nothing crosses the boundary. Darkness does not move closer. It does not recede. It remains where it is. No reflection forms within it. No surface catches light. The dark remains uniform. Beyond the shoji, there is no motion. No sound carries inward. The exterior remains silent. The darkness does not suggest depth. It does not suggest distance. It remains unmeasured. The night outside remains settled. It does not change tone. It remains consistent. Darkness remains without texture. No variation appears within it. No edge becomes visible. The shoji screens hold the dark at bay. They remain closed. The separation remains intact. Outside light does not intrude. Inside light does not escape. The division remains complete. Darkness remains beyond the frames. It does not press against them. It remains distant. No shadow from outside crosses the paper. No silhouette forms. The surface remains blank. The exterior night remains unresolved. It does not ask to be understood. It remains unmarked. Darkness remains constant behind the walls. It does not pulse. It does not fade. The boundary does not soften. It does not sharpen. It remains steady. Beyond the room, the night remains present. It remains outside attention. It remains separate. No detail emerges from the dark. No feature distinguishes one area from another. The dark remains even. The shoji paper shows no change from it. Light inside remains contained. Darkness outside remains complete. The exterior remains quiet without interruption. It does not respond to the interior. It remains indifferent. Darkness beyond the screens does not deepen. It does not lighten. It remains unchanged. No indication of time appears within it. No marker emerges. The night remains without measure. The outside remains still. It does not shift position. It remains fixed. Darkness holds its form beyond the walls. It does not alter its shape. It remains formless. The interior does not reach into it. The exterior does not enter the room. The separation remains firm. No change appears at the boundary. No movement crosses the threshold. Nothing passes through. Darkness remains a quiet absence beyond the screens. It remains without emphasis. It remains background. The night outside does not develop further. It does not advance. It does not retreat. Beyond the shoji, the dark remains settled. It holds its place without effort. It remains finished. No detail arrives from outside. No signal crosses inward. The room remains undisturbed. Darkness beyond the walls remains whole. It remains uninterrupted. It remains complete. The boundary continues to hold. The outside remains unseen. The darkness remains exactly as it is. The paper lantern remains in its place. It provides the only light in the room. Its position does not change. The lantern hangs quietly. It does not sway. It remains still. The paper surface holds a soft glow. The glow stays contained within its shape. No light spills beyond it sharply. The lantern's frame remains unseen beneath the paper. Its structure remains implied. Nothing draws attention to it. Light from the lantern remains warm. It does not intensify. It does not dim. The paper diffuses the light evenly. No section appears brighter than another. The glow remains balanced. The lantern does not flicker. It does not pulse. It remains steady. The light reaches nearby surfaces gently. It does not travel far. It remains close to its source. Shadow begins where the lantern's reach ends. The boundary remains soft. No edge sharpens. The lantern's paper remains intact. No crease forms. No tear appears. Its surface remains smooth in the low light. The texture does not stand out. It remains subtle. The lantern remains unchanged by the night. It does not respond to silence. It remains unaffected. Light remains consistent across time. It does not mark hours. It does not indicate passing moments. The lantern holds the room's focus quietly. It does not demand attention. It remains present. The paper surface absorbs the glow evenly. No reflection distracts from it. The light remains matte. The lantern does not announce itself. It simply remains lit. It remains where it is. The glow fills a small portion of the room. The rest remains in shadow. The balance remains unchanged. The lantern's presence does not shift. It does not move closer or farther. It remains fixed. The paper casing softens the light. No glare forms. The glow remains calm. The lantern remains the sole source of illumination. No other light competes with it. The room remains dim. The light rests on surfaces evenly. It does not linger on any one object. It remains distributed. The lantern does not suggest activity. It does not imply movement. It remains neutral. The glow remains familiar. It does not change character. It remains the same. The lantern's paper remains pale in the light it carries. Its tone remains consistent. No area darkens or brightens. The light remains stable against the surrounding darkness. The contrast remains gentle. Nothing intensifies. The lantern remains suspended. It does not lower or rise. It remains unchanged. The glow continues without interruption. It does not falter. It does not fade. The paper surface remains quiet. It produces no sound. It remains inert. The lantern does not indicate direction. It does not guide movement. It remains stationary. The light remains contained within the room. It does not reach beyond the walls. It remains inside. The lantern's presence does not change the space. It simply holds it. It remains constant. The glow remains soft against the paper casing. The casing remains unchanged by the glow. The balance remains steady. The lantern continues to exist without variation. Its state remains complete. Nothing develops further. The single light remains sufficient. It does not require adjustment. It remains finished. The lantern remains a quiet presence in the room. It holds its place without effort. It remains unnoticed. The light does not respond to time. It does not respond to silence. It remains unchanged. The paper lantern remains lit. Its glow remains contained. The lantern remains exactly as it is. The lantern light fades outward from its source. It remains strongest near the lantern. Its reach does not extend far. Light softens as it spreads across the room. No sharp edge defines it. The transition remains gradual. Brightness diminishes without pattern. It does not stop suddenly. It eases into shadow. The fall-off remains consistent. It does not change direction. It remains even. Light rests briefly on nearby surfaces. It does not linger. It continues outward. Shadow begins where light no longer reaches. The boundary stays soft. No line forms. The lantern glow weakens gradually. Its intensity decreases without emphasis. Nothing interrupts it. The fall-off remains familiar. It does not invite attention. It remains background. Light diminishes across the tatami. It fades between sections. The pattern remains unchanged. Surfaces closer to the lantern remain visible. Those farther away recede into shadow. The balance holds. The fall-off does not signal movement. It does not suggest time passing. It remains static. Light softens along walls and screens. It does not brighten them fully. It remains muted. Shadow occupies the spaces beyond the glow. It remains undisturbed. It does not shift. The lantern's reach remains limited. It does not expand. It does not contract. The fall-off remains uniform in all directions. No area receives more attention. The distribution remains even. Light does not gather in corners. It weakens before reaching them. darkness remains there. The glow remains strongest near its origin. It diminishes steadily outward. Nothing alters the progression. The fall-off does not flicker. It does not pulse. It remains stable. Light thins across surfaces without marking them. No surface reflects it sharply. The texture remains soft. The transition from light to shadow remains smooth. It does not sharpen with distance. It remains gentle. The lantern glow continues to lose strength. It does so evenly. It remains predictable. Shadow takes over where light ends. It remains still. It does not advance further. The fall-off does not draw the eye. It does not form a focal point. It remains passive. Light remains contained within the room. Its reach stops before the walls end. The space beyond remains dim. The fall-off remains unchanged by silence. It does not respond to the night. It remains unaffected. Brightness reduces gradually across the interior. The reduction remains steady. No fluctuation appears. The lantern's glow fades into the room evenly. It does not carve shapes. It does not define edges. Shadow remains where light cannot reach. It remains consistent. It remains quiet. The fall-off does not change character. It does not grow softer or firmer. It remains the same. Light weakens gradually with distance. The weakening remains smooth. Nothing disrupts it. The glow remains subtle away from its source. It does not assert itself. It remains subdued. The fall-off remains a quiet gradient. It does not announce itself. It remains unnoticed. Light and shadow remain balanced through the transition. Neither dominates. The balance remains intact. The lantern light continues to fade outward. Its reduction remains constant. Nothing develops further. The fall-off remains settled for the night. It does not change position. It remains finished. The gradient remains stable across the room. Its softness remains complete. The lantern light fall-off remains exactly as it is. The corners of the room remain dim. They stay outside the lantern's direct light. Their condition does not change. Each corner holds shadow evenly. No corner appears darker than another. The balance remains consistent. The edges where walls meet remain quiet. They do not draw attention. They remain background. Light does not reach fully into the corners. It softens before arriving. Shadow remains there. The corners hold no detail. Nothing separates from the darkness. The surfaces remain indistinct. Each corner remains fixed in place. Its position does not shift. Nothing presses into it. Shadow rests without depth. It does not recede. It does not advance. The corners remain still zones. They do not suggest activity. They remain neutral. No reflection appears within them. No outline forms. The darkness remains even. The corners do not mark time. They do not change with the night. They remain constant. Where walls meet the floor, shadow holds. It does not break apart. It remains settled. The corners remain outside focus. They do not invite inspection. They remain unnoticed. Light weakens before reaching the corners. Its strength diminishes smoothly. Nothing interrupts this transition. The darkness within the corners remains uniform. No texture stands out. No surface asserts itself. The corners remain unchanged by silence. They do not respond to sound. They remain inert. Each corner remains a contained space. It holds no activity. It holds no movement. Shadow stays pooled where lines meet. It remains shallow. It does not deepen. The corners do not suggest distance. They do not suggest depth. They remain undefined. Nothing emerges from them. Nothing retreats into them. They remain unchanged. The lantern light stops short of the corners. The stop remains gentle. No edge sharpens. Corners remain filled with quiet shadow. The quiet remains complete. Nothing interrupts it. Each corner holds its portion of darkness. The portions remain equal. The distribution remains steady. The corners remain passive spaces. They do not influence the room. They remain unaffected. The darkness in the corners does not shift. It does not thin or thicken. It remains the same. No shadow crosses outward from the corners. No shadow withdraws inward. Nothing changes position. The corners remain outside attention. They remain peripheral. They remain quiet. Walls meet in the corners without emphasis. The meeting remains stable. No separation forms. The corners remain settled for the night. They do not prepare for anything further. They remain finished. Shadow continues to occupy these spaces. It does so without movement. It remains still. The corners do not reveal detail over time. They do not conceal change. They remain static. No sound originates from the corners. No sound enters them. Silence remains even. The corners remain part of the room's boundary. They remain intact. They remain whole. Light remains absent there. Shadow remains present. The condition remains stable. The corners remain unchanged by time. They do not indicate passing moments. They remain unmeasured. Nothing draws the eye toward them. Nothing draws the eye away. They remain neutral. The corners continue to exist without emphasis. They remain quiet holders of shadow. They remain unnoticed. The room retains its shape through them. The shape remains intact. Nothing alters it. The corners remain as dark resting points. They do not develop further. They remain complete. The corners of the room remain dim. They remain unchanged. They remain exactly as they are. Low wooden furniture rests close to the floor. Its height remains minimal. Its position does not change. The wood surface remains smooth from use over time. No section appears newly handled. The surface remains even. The furniture sits where it belongs. It does not shift forward or back. It remains still. Edges remain soft in the lantern light. No edge sharpens. The outline remains familiar. The furniture does not invite interaction. It remains unused. It remains settled. The wood grain remains subtle. It does not stand out. It remains background. The furniture remains low against the tatami. Its base stays flat. Nothing lifts or tilts. The form remains simple. No ornament draws focus. The design remains plain. Light reaches the furniture gently. It does not brighten it fully. It remains muted. Shadow gathers beneath the furniture. It remains shallow. It does not deepen. The furniture does not mark time. It does not change with the night. It remains constant. The wood remains quiet. It produces no sound. It remains inert. The furniture remains aligned with the room. Its placement feels ordinary. Nothing feels out of place. The surface shows no movement. No vibration appears. The state remains still. The furniture remains part of the interior. It does not move forward in attention. It remains peripheral. The wood tone remains consistent. No patch appears darker or lighter. The color remains even. The furniture remains grounded on the floor. It does not lift or sink. It remains balanced. The outline remains unchanged by shadow. Shadow does not distort it. The form remains stable. The furniture does not suggest activity. It does not imply use. It remains dormant. Light passes across the wood softly. It does not reflect sharply. The surface remains matte. The furniture remains complete as it is. It does not require adjustment. It remains finished. The wood holds its shape without effort. No joint loosens. Nothing strains. The furniture remains familiar in scale. It matches the room. It does not dominate it. Shadow beneath the furniture remains contained. It does not spread outward. It remains in place. The furniture remains unremarkable. It does not call attention to itself. It remains background. The wood does not respond to silence. It does not respond to darkness. It remains unchanged. The furniture remains settled for the night. It does not prepare for anything further. It remains done. No mark appears or disappears on its surface. No detail becomes clearer over time. The state remains constant. The furniture remains steady against the floor. It remains level. Nothing alters its position. The presence of the furniture does not change the room. It simply occupies its place. It remains neutral. The wood remains quiet under the lantern light. It absorbs the glow evenly. It remains subdued. The furniture remains part of the room's arrangement. The arrangement remains intact. Nothing interrupts it. The furniture remains unchanged by time passing. It does not indicate duration. It remains unmeasured. The low wooden furniture continues to rest close to the floor. It holds its position without effort. It remains exactly as it is. The ceramic tea kettle rests where it was left. It remains unused. Its position does not change. The kettle sits without warmth. No steam rises from it. The surface remains cool. The ceramic body holds a muted tone. The tone remains even. No area appears darker or lighter. The kettle's shape remains simple. Its curve does not draw attention. It remains familiar. The lid rests securely on top. It does not lift. It remains sealed. The spout points outward. It does not drip. Nothing emerges from it. The handle remains still. It does not shift. It remains untouched. The ceramic surface shows no moisture. No condensation forms. The finish remains dry. Light from the lantern reaches the kettle softly. It does not reflect sharply. The glaze remains matte. The kettle does not suggest use. It does not indicate preparation. It remains at rest. No sound comes from the kettle. No vibration follows. Silence remains around it. The kettle remains balanced on its base. It does not tilt. It remains steady. The ceramic holds its shape without strain. No crack appears. The surface remains intact. The kettle does not mark time. It does not cool further. It does not warm. The spout remains empty. No liquid passes through it. It remains dry. The lid remains centered. No gap opens. The seal remains complete. The kettle remains part of the room's stillness. It does not change the space around it. It remains neutral. The ceramic tone remains consistent in the low light. No highlight sharpens. No shadow distorts it. The kettle remains where it belongs. It does not call attention to itself. It remains background. The surface shows no sign of recent use. No warmth lingers. The state remains unchanged. The kettle remains quiet on its surface. It does not respond to the night. It remains unaffected. No mark appears or fades on the ceramic. The glaze remains uniform. The finish remains even. The kettle does not imply future action. It does not suggest return. It remains finished. The handle remains cool and still. It does not invite touch. It remains unused. The kettle remains a simple form. It remains complete. Nothing is missing from it. Light rests briefly on the ceramic surface. It does not linger. It remains gentle. The kettle remains unchanged by silence. It does not respond to darkness. It remains inert. The spout remains pointed outward without purpose. No drop forms at its edge. It remains dry. The lid remains closed. The closure remains firm. Nothing loosens. The kettle does not shift position over time. It remains exactly where it rests. It remains still. The ceramic holds its temperature. No change registers. The state remains constant. The kettle remains quiet within the room. It contributes no sound. It remains silent. The form remains recognizable without emphasis. It does not demand inspection. It remains familiar. The kettle remains settled for the night. It does not prepare for use. It remains done. The ceramic tea kettle continues to rest unused. It holds its place without effort. It remains exactly as it is. The air in the room remains quiet. It holds without movement. Its condition does not change. No sound passes through the air. Nothing disturbs it. It remains even. The air rests within the room. It does not circulate. It remains still. No current forms. No shift occurs. The state remains unchanged. The air does not carry voices. It does not carry movement. It remains empty of sound. Silence holds within the air. The silence remains uniform. No break appears. The air fills the space evenly. It does not gather in one place. It remains balanced. Nothing travels through the air. No vibration follows. The stillness remains intact. The air does not signal time. It does not change with the night. It remains constant. The air remains unnoticed. It does not draw attention. It remains background. No scent rises within it. Nothing fades away. The air remains neutral. The room holds its air without effort. The air holds its place. Nothing presses against it. The air does not respond to light. It does not respond to shadow. It remains unaffected. No temperature shift registers. No change appears. The air remains stable. The air rests between walls and ceiling. It fills corners and open space equally. It remains even. No motion appears within it. No disturbance forms. The state remains still. The air remains consistent across the room. It does not thin or thicken. It remains uniform. The air does not announce itself. It does not withdraw. It remains present. Silence remains carried by the air. The silence does not deepen. It does not fade. The air does not support activity. It does not encourage movement. It remains passive. Nothing enters the air from outside. Nothing leaves the room through it. The boundary remains complete. The air remains settled for the night. It does not prepare for anything further. It remains finished. No sound arises within the air. No echo forms. The quiet remains intact. The air does not respond to silence. It does not react. It remains inert. The air remains part of the room's stillness. It does not change the space. It remains neutral. The air holds no direction. It does not flow forward or back. It remains balanced. No shift in pressure occurs. No signal passes through. The state remains constant. The air remains quiet beneath the lantern light. It carries no sound. It carries no movement. The air remains unchanged by darkness. It does not respond to time passing. It remains unmeasured. The room retains its air without effort. The air retains its stillness. Nothing alters it. The air remains evenly distributed. It remains unbroken. It remains whole. No attention is drawn to the air. It remains unnoticed. It remains quiet. The air continues to exist without emphasis. It does not develop further. It remains complete. The quiet air of the room remains present. It holds its place without effort. It remains exactly as it is. Light remains in the interior. It exists without reference. Its presence does not point back to anything. Brightness rests in the space. It does not announce where it comes from. It simply remains. The light holds a steady level. It does not rise or fall. It stays even. Illumination fills part of the interior. The rest remains dim. The balance does not change. Light no longer emphasizes objects. It remains diffuse. Brightness exists as a condition. It does not belong to a thing. It does not suggest cause. The interior remains gently lit. The lighting does not direct attention. It does not guide the eye. Light holds the space quietly. It does not move outward or inward. It remains present. The source no longer matters. The result remains. Brightness continues. Illumination does not change character. It does not sharpen or fade. Light blends with the interior. It remains indistinct. Brightness remains without instruction. It does not ask for notice. Light exists. The interior remains lit. Nothing more is required. Space remains present. It holds without clear edges. Its boundaries no longer assert themselves. The interior exists as a single field. It does not separate into parts. It simply remains. Walls no longer define the space. Corners lose distinction. The outline softens. The interior holds itself without shape. It does not require framing. It remains whole. Distance becomes indistinct. Near and far no longer differ. The space evens out. The room no longer presents direction. There is no forward or back. The interior remains neutral. Edges fade into the surrounding presence. They do not mark separation. They remain unimportant. Space holds without enclosure. It does not press inward or outward. It remains balanced. The interior no longer asks to be located. It does not orient attention. It simply exists. The sense of boundary softens further. Nothing marks where space ends. Nothing marks where it begins. The interior becomes continuous. It remains uninterrupted. Space exists without reference points. It does not define position. It remains open. The interior holds steady as a presence. It does not change shape. Space remains. The interior remains present. Nothing more is required. Stillness remains. It holds without reference to things. Objects no longer define it. The interior rests in a quiet state. Nothing within it asserts form. It simply remains. Stillness does not attach to surfaces. It does not settle on items. It exists on its own. The sense of activity fades. No action is implied. The state remains neutral. Stillness no longer belongs to the room's contents. It belongs to the interior itself. It remains whole. Nothing moves because nothing needs to. Nothing waits to move later. The condition holds. Stillness remains without contrast. It does not oppose motion. It exists alone. The interior holds no signal of change. No event forms. Nothing develops. Stillness does not require explanation. It does not invite attention. It remains background. The sense of presence becomes simple. Nothing stands apart. Nothing draws notice. Stillness fills the interior evenly. It does not collect anywhere. It remains uniform. The interior rests in this condition. It does not shift. Stillness remains. Nothing more is required. Time remains present. It no longer points to sequence. It does not move forward. Moments do not separate from one another. They rest together. The division softens. Time no longer marks beginning or end. It does not signal progress. It simply remains. Duration exists without measurement. It does not shorten or lengthen. It holds steady. There is no earlier or later. There is no before or after. The distinction fades. Time does not require attention. It does not demand tracking. It remains background. The sense of passing loosens. Nothing urges movement. Nothing concludes. Time exists without direction. It does not lead anywhere. It remains neutral. The interior holds duration quietly. Duration holds the interior quietly. The relationship no longer matters. Time remains without reference. It remains unmeasured. Time remains. Nothing more is required.